All right. Hello, everyone. This is episode 16 of Dispersing the Fog. Here with my name's Adam Rogers, and I'm here with Paul Palango. And welcome, Paul, and welcome everybody. So, big week, Paul. Big week for you. Big
Well,
week.
I don't know about that, dude. I'm sure you had a big week too,
I did actually have a pretty good week. Although one really bad thing that happened this week was my Oilers lost to the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Finals, and but that they lost handily. So I don't know if that's a better or worse thing. People are now
well,
saying
it's like Edmonton didn't adapt, and Florida is a pretty impressive team. I mean, they're just tough. They're really tough, really fast, really disciplined.
made it a little bit better that Brad Marchand, Nova Scotian, was on the winning team. Too bad the Oilers or the Leafs or somebody else didn't try to get him at the deadline when he was available, but that's how that goes.
He's such
Another,
a he's such a pest, but he is very, very good. You
yeah,
can't.
he works like he's a small guy, but he gets into these small spaces and he can maneuver, right? And anyway, it's impressive in many ways. Paul, there was another Oilers fan that you're chasing. You're very close to Mark Carney, our Prime Minister, who's a noted Oilers fan. Went to a few games and practices of the Oilers when he was campaigning. Had the jersey on many times, and his book is number one on some charts in Canada. Mark Carney Values. But the number two book on some of those charts, and actually number one, I think maybe in one, is Anatomy of a Cover-Up.
Yeah, Anatomy of a
Unbelievable.
Cover-Up was an instant bestseller on the Toronto Star list. And Random House was pretty excited about that. And then they said, I don't know how they do this, but they said, and the Globe and Mail list is coming out tomorrow, and you're probably going to be number two on that because they calculate it differently. And then it comes out, and I'm number two. But that's good a place as any to start, considering the number of books that are published.
That is great. Uh, Curious, I mean, you must be into this world a little bit now where you're trying to figure out how does a bestseller get calculated? Isn't it just based on how many books you sell? That seems like the basic
I
calculation.
have I have no idea
Yeah.
how it's calculated, but
Well, there must be some consideration of pre-sales and other things too, I guess. Maybe there's not a perfect information system out there for it.
well, I know that it is selling, and that what from the messages I'm getting and from the bookstores that I've talked to, um, the sales now of 22 Murders have gone up for the people who didn't read it, and
Yeah.
they want to they're going, oh my God, there's a second book. I got to read the first one to get clued in. So they're working together, and then the other benefit of all this is that by doing the second book, which I guess they figured never would happen, uh, interest in the story for film and documentaries has gone through the roof. So I spent last week fielding interviews, and next week coming up fielding interviews with various entities that are interested in pursuing this on film or documentary. Um, which is
I think it's a good way to take it, because you can see that it would be such a dramatic situation. There's fires, a lot of visuals that you could see being benefiting from a documentary kind of style format.
Well, the other thing about it is now with the second story, the second book, I've shown what I couldn't show in the first book conclusively. In the first book, I was daring enough to say it's a cover up
Yeah.
in the title. Before the Mass Casualty Commission had even sat down, and people said, "Oh, you're blowing smoke. You're a conspiracy theory." In the second book, I use all the information they gathered plus our own investigation to show the cover up and how it worked and how it was coordinated. So,
Yeah, it
and
is
that's
something
given a lot
else.
of credibility to the first book.
Well, I think so, because you refer back sometimes, and people that don't know, you wrote that first book before the Mass Casualty Commission, before much of this evidence was out in the public in any way. It was something that you gathered through your sources, some that was publicly available, and just analyzed it in a different way that was a lot more compelling than mass casualty. As I was reading this Anatomy of a Cover-Up, one of the things that struck me was that probably could have saved some millions of dollars through the Mass Casualty Commission if they had just handed you the information and said, Paul Palango, would you assemble a team, go through this for us, and tell us what happened? Tell the public what happened. And you probably would have done
And
that
I
for
think that's
something
what
less
we
than 30
did. I
million.
think we did a reasonably good job of telling an alternate story.
Yeah. Like,
Uh,
it was,
but
go ahead.
before we move on, like I'd like to go back to this Mark Carney thing. Here I am
Yeah.
with the Prime Minister tied at the top of the bestseller list. We're like equals almost.
Well,
This is
certainly in this sense, you are, and maybe others.
he's got. I'm sure he has well, I know he has a lot more money and power than I do. But for this brief moment as equals, I think we should look at his book and how it applies to this story. Because he's the new guy on the block.
Yeah.
He's come from outside politics. He's had nothing to do with any of this. Now he's the prime minister, and I'm sure he's not watching this show. But maybe someone could pass along this show to him and bring his attention to it, because we're going to talk about how his book uh, affects this story and how he should see this story. I mean, in his book, which is largely about the economy and businesses and stuff, Carney argues there are seven values. And well, no, before we get into that,
Yeah.
well, no, he argues there are seven values and beliefs that underpin a thriving economy: dynamism, resilience, sustainability, fairness, responsibility, solidarity, and humility. Well, how does that work in this case? Before we get to that, let's look at what is Carney doing now. This book has been out for 14 days. We've talked about the cover-ups and all the various aspects of the cover-ups. Who shot Corey Ellison, the fake Heidi Stevenson story, the execution of Wortman being an agent. We could go on for a dozen things we could show they covered up. And Carney, the new prime minister, like all politicians, goes into office and he says to his advisors, what's this Palango guy and what's he writing about? So who does he go to? He probably goes to the RCMP commissioner and others who are related to policing, right? Is that how it works?
I would think so. That he would have official advisors. He might have some unofficial people that would be giving him tips on what should be his priorities and who he can trust and these sorts of things. But as the prime minister, you're getting advice through the regular channels, through the ministries, through the public service, through the RCMP.
So he goes to the RCMP commissioner, Mike Duhame, who took over after the massacres in 2020. And really, there's probably three things Duhame would tell him. Number one, ignore Palango. He's a Mountie hater. He's written 5 books hating on the Mounties. The story's not true, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
And my answer to that is I've seen it this week in some of the comments about Anatomy of a Cover-Up. He's a Mountie hater, da 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 da. It's the same voice. It's the Smurfs, and they're being drowned out by others. Like so many I've heard from, and over the years and in recently, I don't hate the Mounties. I hate what they've become. That there are thousands of ex-Mounties out there who are singing the same song. That there's a real problem with this force. So Mr. Carney should think carefully when they say ignore me. It's not just me. There are all kinds of Canadians who are on our team now. It's a large team.
And Paul, trying to, you're identifying these shortcomings in the way the structure is made and how, some of the training turns out nowadays that don't have the right motivation. Like you're trying to help the, the RCMP become better and serve Canadians better by pointing these things out. It's not malicious. It's not out of, some sort of hatred or attitude of that nature. It's just trying to improve things so that everybody is safer and served better.
Absolutely. That's exactly my motivation. Um, the number two thing Dehane would say is, "Oh, Mr. Prime Minister, the Mass Casualty Commission public inquiry settled all of this. Uh, the Mounties didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, we made a few little mistakes, but we were under pressure." There's a large constituency in Canada who likes to believe that. Oh, leave them alone. This madman caused these problems. We don't want to get into this. It's too depressing. We don't want to hear it. Well, the Mass Casualty Commission didn't settle a goddamn thing.
No. No.
The evidence was ignored, hidden, and manipulated by the MCC in concert with the federal and provincial governments and the RCMP. And I show that clearly in the book, don't I?
You do, and the public saw that as well when everybody was watching the mass casualty. And the proof of that is that the there's been very little implementation of recommendations from the mass casualty since then. If it had, been something that settled everything and made it clear and had clear recommendations, one would presume that that would have flowed forward and made changes, enacted changes, but that's not what happened because people didn't respect the Mass Casualty Commission and the recommendations.
Yeah, and we caught them in lies. From the beginning, we caught them in lies. We showed that they were destroying evidence. We got the 911 tapes to show that they were lying. Other recordings to show they're lying. The videotapes, on and on and on. We showed they're lying. I got a message yesterday from a former police officer, senior police officer, who's been following the case from the outset. Here's what he wrote about what I did in Anatomy of a Cover-Up. It's Investigation 101. Catch him, her, or them in just one lie. Doesn't have to be an admission to the ultimate confession. Just needs to be used to catch the next lie, and then the next, and on and on. Then you get your end result. Hopefully, that will be who killed Corey Ellison. That's my unsolicited observation, and sorry, I know I wasn't asked. But I am truly impressed as to what has transpired, and I hope and expect a few more whistleblowers.
It's so true, Paul. Like when I'm doing a cross-examination of a witness, that's what you look for. You look, okay, can I prove that you've lied about something? All right. And if that witness's credibility is important to the case, if I can prove you've lied about something, then everything else that you claim is tainted because we know that you're capable of lying and you're motivated potentially to do so. And so everything else you say is now up in the air and subject to, to doubt.
Yeah, and that's so, Mr. Carney, we've caught them in lie after lie after lie. The third thing that Mr. Duhame or anyone like him speaking to the Prime Minister is going to say, we're not going to respond to it. It will all blow over. So we're 14 days down the road since the first podcast where we talked about this. I've been on radio, other podcasts, TV. I'm going on TV. I'm on TV today out west. Um, it's not going to blow over.
Well,
Mr. Carney, there are so many people engaged in this story now. Others are coming on board. I can feel it. I can see it. There's sort of a groundswell of people because any conspiracy eventually breaks up and people are holding things inside. They can't live with the lie. They want to get it out. And we're finding the story. And it's not just me and it's not just Adam or Chad or Ryan or it's ex-police officers, people inside the police themselves and government who are coming forward, like True Blue did back in the day and released things. There are other people coming out. I've talked about this with movie crews and film crews and explained not only the story that I've written, but where this story is going. There's like a third book coming out of this, and it's going to happen. So essentially, Mr. Carney, the you can try to wait us out, or you can do the right thing. And maybe the right thing is get the RCMP to tell the truth, or if you're convinced they're not telling the truth, fire a whole bunch of them for cause, for lying, cut off their pensions, maybe claw some back from others who left on sick leave and never came back and they're collecting double pensions. That would bring instant accountability to the RCMP. That would snap everyone to attention that there's something on the line.
Well, one doesn't want to compare anything to down south, but at least there somebody people get fired every once in a while. It seems in Canada at these upper levels that people just get shuffled around and moved, not ever, made to take responsibility. I was looking at that list of values from Mark Carney's book, which but I started reading. I started reading when he was campaigning for Liberal leader, and I was like, oh man, this is just such consultant speak, modern whatever. I had heard Carney speak on ideas talking about his environmental economic combination approach to leadership, and I figured it would be just more of that. But maybe he's emphasizing solidarity and not the responsibility and humility among the values among the seven values.
Well, it is corporate speak. And you look at this and say, but the Mounties are a police force. They're a guardian entity, but they are and they're not. As I pointed out in books since 1998, they see themselves as a corporate entity. They've been indoctrinated about operating like a business. There are idiots out there who think this is a good thing that guardian agencies operate as a business. It's not a good thing.
No.
But Carney, his seven values and beliefs can be applied to the RCMP. And Mr. Carney should pay attention here. Let's take them one by one. We could have
Yeah.
fun with this.
So first one is dynamism.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, so the RCMP has, I would say, lacked dynamism. They have not really changed their structure, their approach to policing, or much of anything. I saw an officer last week with a new shirt that looked like a nicer version of a long sleeve shirt, but that was about it. That's about
Yeah,
the change they generate.
that's right. They're not dynamic in any way. They talk about it, but dynamism to them is putting on their, 19th century tunics and standing, riding a horse around a hockey arena. That's dynamism to them.
Yeah.
Every police, every police agency I talk to says the same thing. Dealing with the RCMP is a nightmare for police forces. As one police officer came to me at an event last weekend, he says, "You know what? When we deal with the RCMP, what they call us? Reliable sources. We're not even other police to them. We're a reliable source."
Well, so dynamic would seem to imply too that if they react to new things that are happening, such as, the emphasis on ports and smuggling through ports, that's become an issue. And you described in Anatomy of a Cover-Up, about halfway through or a little more, how the ports have been used throughout Nova Scotia and probably in BC
Yeah.
as well. And, you think a dynamic RCMP would respond to that change.
No, they don't respond to, no,
Uh,
it's out of the question.
The next one is resilience, and I guess I would say they have been resilient with people helping out, and they've managed to survive over these many, many years. Although that might be that might be suffering at this moment.
Well, I think they're only resilient because politicians and government and much of the public have forgiven them for everything. You know, thousands of Mounties have left complaining about the forest being just dysfunctional. There have been reports saying it's dysfunctional. None of that sinks into the political leadership that this is a problematic institution. It needs to be fixed. So its resilience is really false because
Yeah.
it's never had to stand on its own and it's always been supported and it hasn't warranted that support. So I'd say it's not resilient, and Mr. Carney should look at it and see it in that light.
Well, it's definitely not the next thing, which is sustainability. So you look at sustainability, and what does that usually entail? It's something that regenerates, regenerates through recruiting, through, I guess, and attracting new members from other forces and other professions. But that doesn't seem to be a strength of the RCMP, and in particular, probably because they haven't changed their education system, their training module from the 6 month stint out in Saskatchewan. We heard in the Mass Casualty Commission how Finland does a 3 year degree, and there's other approaches. So I think recruiting has been suffering with the RCMP, and that hurts their sustainability.
Well, the other thing that hurts your sustainability is the world has changed. People don't want to be sent to rural detachments in the middle of nowhere, have no control over their life, and just be essentially removed from society and members of essentially a cult. So they don't join that. They want to be where the action is, where cities are, and they want to be in a forest where there's accountability and fairness and stuff like that. Which leads us to,
Well, fairness is the next one.
oh, there's a report on their own government report a couple of years ago said the forest is unsustainable in its current form.
Yeah.
They ignored that report. Mr. Carney, dig that report up and read it.
The fairness, well, I'm not sure how to think of fairness in terms of the RCMP. Uh, exactly. What do you think with that one?
Um, they've shown over the years a willingness, even in this day, to punish those who don't agree with them,
Yeah,
both inside the force and outside the force. They're not fair. If they're dealing with, we paid out probably $1 billion in settlements to Mounties who have been wronged.
exactly. Sexual assault claims
Sexual assault claims, everything
proliferating.
ignored.
Yeah,
When they're dealing with journalists like me, are they fair? No. What they
no,
do is they try to change the discussion, avoid any sort of confrontation, character assassination. They're very good at character assassination, terrorizing politicians, making them subtly make them fear doing anything against the RCMP. We've seen that. We talked about it in the past about BC. People who want to change the RCMP suddenly get charges laid against them.
yeah.
This is a force that is not fair. It's never been fair. Doesn't treat other police forces fairly. And the last thing on fairness, one of the things, you have members of the RCMP, and I alluded to this earlier, who are supposed to be these paragons of virtue, these agents of the law. And hundreds and hundreds of them have rigged the system, taken sick leave, gone off on sick leave prior to their retirement on an extended sick leave, go into retirement on sick leave, and they get two pensions as a result of that. They get a sick leave benefit and their regular pension. They call it like infinite ODS.
Yeah.
That's off duty sick. Infinite. They get paid forever. So they're rigging them. And I can think of superintendents who've done this, assistant commissioners, the top level people are screwing the taxpayers. They don't care for the taxpayers. Maybe, Mr. Carney, you should look at this system and it's being abused. Do something about it because, if anything, the Mounties are not being fair to the
Well,
Canadian
there's
taxpayer.
something that can be considered in the renegotiations. But yeah, I was thinking of the sick leave. What was there, 70 or so that took sick leave for the whole summer after the shootings here in 2020?
Yeah, so and some of them never came back.
Yeah.
And as I may have said this earlier, um, a number of police officers who are most of them former police officers who are familiar with this said the reason the 70 took off was they knew the real story and they were told not to come back until they were go along with the real story. And
Well,
some of them never came back. And we want those people to come out of the woodwork and corroborate what we are going to do because we are going to move forward with this story.
doesn't seem very responsible. Responsibility being the next value that's important to the prime minister. Taking responsibility, shouldering your responsibilities. That doesn't seem to be a strength of the RCMP at this point. They're not really fulfilling their role as the federal police with the ports and the borders, and they don't take responsibility when they mess up.
No, there have been all kinds of recommendations over the last 40 years, and they've ignored those recommendations. They never take responsibility for their own actions. They deflect, speak in half truths, and even lie. And how do they get away with this? Because they're never held accountable. No one ever holds them accountable. As I said, Mr. Carney, my book proves they and the Mass Casualty Commission lied. Your predecessor's government orchestrated a cover up. Number of people were involved. Find out who they are, fire them. You'll see that people will suddenly speak up and tell the people what really happened. And from that, we can have real change and reform.
Well, there's people, Paul, that are coming to you, and some of them are in senior positions. Though there are significant aspects of the RCMP and policing in Canada that want these changes made. Like it's not as though if the prime minister was thinking of making changes that he would be pushing against the entire system. It's a little bit, I don't, this might not be quite a fair comparison, but we're potentially right now in at the beginning stages of another war in the Middle East, and what the US seems to be trying to do is lop the top off of the Iranian regime and allow the many, many Iranians in the next levels below of authority and responsibility to take on the higher responsibility and make the country a better place. Well, if you get rid of some of the leadership of the RCMP, make some changes in that way, there's a significant chunk of the RCMP that would step in and make it a better organization.
Oh, absolutely. And other police forces and policing groups across the country are now calling for severe reform because the RCMP at the federal level is basically a non-player. I mean, there was a big drug bust in southern Ontario the other day. No RCMP involvement whatsoever, cross-border, all this stuff. They don't want to deal with the RCMP because the RCMP screws up too many things and can't be trusted to do the job right.
As I
Mr.
said,
Carney, you can check that out. It's not just me.
the next two, the last two are solidarity, which I have said mentioned before. Maybe the RCMP has loads of that, and humility, which they seem to be completely lacking. And they have a sort of a false humility that people have when it's the sort of, oh, I apologize if I offended you. I apologize if you think I did something wrong. Not true humility.
No, solidarity in the RCMP is protect the buffalo. The buffalo being the symbol of the RCMP going back to its, beginnings in 1874. But it's like a cult. It has the solidarity of a cult. And getting people out of that cult, it's difficult because many of them are true believers. And as you said, the humility, there's nothing humble about the RCMP. Their humility is fake. And how this book came about, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, is that I was able to, not only me, but all the people with me, play on the hubris of the force, that it was invincible, that no one could touch it, that no one would believe a negative story about them, and that no matter what happened, the government would protect them. And that's their humility.
Yeah.
And Mr. Carney, do something about it. You know, your own book lays out the issues here, and they all apply to the RCMP. And finally, there's one other thing he talks about in his book Values is ethical leadership. Why don't you riff on that one for
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, well, ethical leadership certainly in political life would be important, that you want to make sure that you're, well, I'm watching him now as he's, trying to put together these nation building projects. And, so one of the ethical things you do there is you bring everybody on board that's relevant, the different jurisdictions and this sort of thing. Uh, Included among those will be First Nations communities, and there's an ethical duty of the Prime Minister of the country to engage with First Nations communities and, work to build consent for all these kinds of things. Well, if you do, pretend engagement, fake consultations, well, you undermine everything that you're trying to do in that regard. It's a little different with policing, but ethical leadership, what it does is, if people, you have to both do it and be seen to be doing it, right? Because doing it has its own effects because you're the leader and you have a lot of authority. But being seen to be an ethical leader, then it permeates the entire organization, because especially in a big organization like the RCMP, where you have people controlling their regions, their districts, and they are themselves leaders, and they themselves have to make important decisions that affect a lot of people's lives. Well, if they see the top level and the top levels behaving in ways that are not ethical and that are cutting corners and that are, uh, whatever, then that's what they're going to do themselves. And the opposite is also true. If they see, all right, the top guys or the top leaders are making the right decisions, well, that permeates within the organization too. And then you find out, how are you going to be promoted within the organization? Is it by being an ethical leader, or is it by getting results through cutting corners and making unethical choices? And that can really that can affect an entire organization.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've been building up over the years, and surprisingly, in the last 2 weeks since the book has come out, getting more information about cases where the RCMP leadership has destroyed evidence, railroaded people, railroaded its own members right across the country because they were doing things that were not liked by the leaders. So, so essentially, the sycophants rise like in a Donald Trump world, and the real cops are getting dismissed and screwed because the leadership will do anything to maintain its hold on the force.
Yeah.
And in cases, it will, as I said, it will destroy evidence, lose evidence, hide evidence, lie, distract people from what's really going on. I've written about this in the past, but it's growing. And the whole group of people I'm dealing with now, we're all talking about it and sharing things. And eventually, this is going to come out, Mr. Carney. And the way to deal with it is change, do something.
Yeah. It seems like, and I think he realizes it could, but he seems to be focusing on these actual, pipelines, energy projects, all of these things that cross provincial borders. But this policing in our country, which is in, a state of crisis in many ways, this could be something that draws his attention and can be a real legacy piece for Mark Carney if he chooses to address it.
Oh, one last piece in his book. One of the things he talks about is the successful businesses, successful enterprises, he can correct me if I'm wrong, need to be regulated because regulated industries do better than unregulated industries in all ways. One of the problems in Canada is there is virtually no policing of regulations. There's no policing under the law. The RCMP is not there. It has been taken out of the, it used to be there in the 60s and 70s. But after Mulrooney, it was taken, their role as a federal police force was diminished, as was regulation, market enforcement, things like that. So the markets are casinos. People know the Canadian stock market is dead, partly because there's no regulation. Anyone with a brain doesn't want to invest because your money can get stolen and nothing is going to be done about it.
Yeah, there's uncertainty as to the market that way. I mean, just the fact that cryptocurrency is a thing that exists. I mean, that's anyway, there's back in the 90s and earlier when there was actually some regulation. I mean, that was when the economy was booming on all fronts, right? So there needs to be some. So I think, Paul, that Prime Minister Carney has an opportunity here to seize an opportunity and make a legacy for himself. And I was just thinking too about bad leadership drives out good leaders too. And, if he allows this to continue, then it's only going to get worse because the good leaders within the RCMP that may have seen, or within policing in Canada, that may have seen this as an opportunity for major change, if it now doesn't happen, that'll just be an extra discouragement to say, well, if not now, when? And maybe never, if not now.
That's a good point because I've had insiders telling me that the good people have been driven. I've seen this myself. Good people have been driven out of the force um, for the last 20 years because of the politicization of the force. The people have been chosen to lead, and the good ones are leaving. And there's a line in the book from one of the former Mounties out in Alberta who says, bad cops should fear good cops, not the other way around, because the other way around is the way it is now. The good cops fear the bad cops because there's this culture of bullying, sort of self interest, patting their own nest, and not dealing with the issues that are fundamental.
So, Paul, I was if Mark Carney is still listening, or as his people are, I think it would be nice to hit on one of the, I guess, stark examples from Anatomy of a Cover-Up. That we mentioned this last week, but I want to come back because I've got a few theories that I want you to get your reaction.
Yeah,
Okay.
by now you should get Mr. Carney's advisors, if you're watching this, bring him in and we're going to give him show him exactly what they did and why they haven't been responding for the last 2 weeks to these allegations.
Oh yeah, so yeah, on that point, that nobody from the RCMP or policing has seemed to have reacted from Public Safety Canada has reacted to the publication of this book. Yet there is a very stark example here, okay, so uh, the death of Corey Ellison. Corey Ellison, we know, took a photo with his phone at 10:40 p.m. Okay, so he was still alive when he took that photo. Uh, the theory from the mass casualty was that Gabriel Wortman killed Corey Ellison and then left Portapic through an alternate exit through the through the blueberry field. Okay, there's two problems with that. One, Dean Dillman was at Brown's Loop, which is where the Blueberry Field Road exits to the main road. You'd have to go past Dean Dillman to get out. Dean Dillman made phone calls at 10:38 and 10:42 from that location, and he stayed there for another 10 or 15 minutes afterwards. Okay, so it is impossible that Gabriel Wortman killed Corey Ellison after 10:40 and then left through the Blueberry Field and Browns Loop thereafter without being spotted by Dean Dillman, who did not spot him and was in lands and forests, well experienced, a good witness for this kind of situation. So that couldn't have happened. The second part is the Blueberry Field itself, and this was purposefully, I would suggest, manipulated by the Mass Casualty Commission. We had one witness, Staff Sergeant Al Carroll, who noted that he was at the bottom of Orchard Beach Drive, looked across and saw a chain across the Blueberry Field entrance from Portapic into the Blueberry Field. Another witness
Deborah
testified,
Tebow.
Tebow,
Deborah
Deborah
Tebow.
Tebow testifies early on in the mass casualty, kind of disconnected from everything else, that she got home when she was allowed back to her residence. And, she looks at this Blueberry Field entrance all the time. It's right next to her house. And she looks across, and lo and behold, the post is broken off. The thing is, the rope is down. Somebody must have exited that way. And so that's where the theory comes in that that's he exited through the Blueberry Field.
No, let me correct you there.
Okay.
Deborah Tebow recalled that the rope was up, much like Carol testified. When she left on Saturday, the rope was up. Sunday morning, well, before Wortman had even been killed, Carol says he saw the rope up. 3 days later, 2 days later, when Tebow comes back, the fence is smashed and the rope is down, and the RCMP tried to make the case that Wortman had knocked it over in his escape. But there are
Yeah.
two witnesses who saw it up,
Yeah.
her and Staff Sergeant Carroll, whose evidence was given 57 days apart to and masked, and no one picked up on the importance of the rope.
So it looks as though it looks as though the RCMP smashed that post and made it look like Wortman exited through the Blueberry Field. It also looks like somebody other than Wortman killed Corey Ellison. Because, all right, what's the alternative? All right, if he didn't go through the Blueberry Field, then the only other exit is through the main exit to the community, which is where RCMP had several officers set up to intercept people or to check on people as they were leaving the community. So, one would have thought that a fully marked RCMP car trying to exit the community through that checkpoint would have drawn some attention, but nobody has mentioned it. So, if we're looking and thinking about what is a big, you know, what is a big cluster or something that would have caused the RCMP such embarrassment that they needed to cover it up and do whatever they had to do to cover it up. Well, here we go. There is Gabriel Wortman leaving right through the checkpoint, and possibly one of the people killed was not killed by Gabriel Wortman. I mean, it's those things all can't be true. I guess that he left through the Blueberry Field and killed Corey Ellison. It just cannot be. So there's some other peculiar parts to this. One being, well, there was some I guess hesitation or some difficulty with the RCMP officers who were stationed at the head of the community not going into the community. Like they were some of them were itching to go in, some weren't. So did somebody just go off on their own without authority and all of a sudden accidentally kill Corey Ellison? Maybe knocked on the door at the Macaulay home. Would that explain a knock on the door that the kids heard? There's some questions there. Was it Lisa Banfield? She was in the woods. There's a lot of questions that come up with this.
Well, the killing of Corey Ellison, I mean, to reiterate, his brother Clinton, who was hiding in the woods during that period, and Lisa Banfield was supposedly hiding in that area at the same time. The killing, Clinton Ellison always said from early on, I think the Mounties killed my brother. And he was dismissed as being erratic, and he had some issues and stuff like that. But he always insisted on that, but everybody shot him down. That was impossible. Our Mounties would never do that, and they would never lie. But the accidental shooting of Corey Ellison, you assume what happened. Everything else fits together neatly. because we never had explanations for a number of things. One, Ryan Potter, citizen investigator, put in an access request to say that someone accessed information request that was turned down, where he said someone accessed Corey Ellison's phone after he was shot at 10:40:12 and went through the phone. And one has to think, well, who would have done that? In the access request, it was denied because the RCMP said, "You'll love this. We're only interested in what happened up to the point that Corey Ellison was killed. We're not interested in what happened afterwards." Well, to me, I would speculate that whoever shot Corey Ellison picked up his phone and went through it to see if he had any pictures of them.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
If you
definitely.
assume that Corey Ellison was killed, remember it's just to the south of the gate to Wortman's property at 136 Orchard Beach Drive. Across the street is the Lisa McCulley house at 135, where four children are hiding in the basement, two age 12, two age 10. Their parents are all dead, the Blairs and Lisa McCulley. The lingering question is, why did the RCMP not go to rescue those kids for 3 hours? Answer: maybe they didn't want other officers stumbling on the body that's lying by the road, because that would be an investigation in and of itself. In police procedure, people who have read the book in the last couple of days came to me and said, every time you find a body, a police officer should be stationed there protecting the site. The RCMP don't do that. They allow the site to be polluted. That is damning. Another piece of evidence, on the map, they move on the map, the official map of where things fell. The MCC allowed a map into evidence that showed the body on the other side of the road, which was conducive to telling the story that Ellison or Wortman went south on Orchard Beach Drive. Ellison's body was on the west side of Orchard Beach Drive, not the east. So why did they move that body? To make their narrative work. Another piece of evidence I've came across this week was last week I talked about Superintendent Archie Thompson, who was in charge of the entire area. A couple of things have come up about Thompson now. Like I went through his notes. I never saw this before, but at his first note, handwritten note, obviously written after the period, and to my knowledge, does not reflect actually what happened. And I've written about this in the past. Archie Thompson's first note is at 10:50 p.m. And he says he got a phone call from Staff Sergeant Steve Halliday, who was part of one of the first incident commanders. And Halliday said, shots fired in Portapique. This is 10 minutes after Corey Ellison dies. And by the RCMP's own definition, own original narrative, Wortman was gone by 10:45.
Yeah.
And Halliday has never questioned about the shots fired at 10:50 when that is. Is he referring to the shots at 10:40 that killed Ellison, presumably the last shots fired? We don't know.
Yeah,
The
we
other
don't
thing
know. And
then
then
the last point, the other thing you brought up was the officers who arrive after 10:35, 10:40 are all 25 officers or so. I don't think there was that many, are pushed out of the community to the west doing busy work, chasing lights in five houses on the other side of the river. Because the RCMP by now, is it Archie Thompson? Archie Thompson was the superintendent in charge of that area, the highest ranking officer. He says in his original note, set up a perimeter. Was the perimeter to keep all the Mounties out of Portapique so they wouldn't see Corey Ellison's body and start asking questions about who shot him?
seems like it, Paul. Like it seems like, it adds up to giving them more time to figure out what we're going to tell people. What are we going to tell people about this? And they weren't counting on Dean Dillman's evidence at Brown's Loop, and so things aren't adding up. Like it just simply doesn't.
And they hit, and I'm telling you, Mr. Carney, we've nailed down, if you want to get mad at us or have the RCMP is going to, keep tapping my phones and doing the stuff they do occasionally to people, uh, there are too many people involved now. Too many people know the story. One of the people who's been hidden in all this is Archie Thompson. As I've written in the past, Archie Thompson was the superintendent in charge of the area. Many of the people who were investigating from the beginning, Staff Sergeant Addie McCallum, was from his area. The Pictou County tapes that we uncovered, the analog station that they went to after midnight that night, was Archie Thompson's area. That's where Archie Thompson hung his hat. Um, Archie Thompson said in his testimony, and according to his notes, he took notes up to around midnight, went to bed, and then got up at 7 o'clock and then didn't do anything, didn't participate. I've written in the past, my sources say he was out all night and came back in the morning and got his rifle. Where was he? What was he doing? He's never really asked that. Then he since retired. The other thing I've learned about Archie Thompson this week that may come into to play as we go through this story and into the next version of this story. Archie Thompson used to brag, I'm told, that he was the only one in his area who had the power to order a shoot to kill. So think about it. He's the only one in the area who has, uh, a compromised authority mandate. So, with compromised authority, you can delegate the duty to shoot that person at any time, and you don't have to come back to me for approval.
Huh.
This fits into the larger story that has been ignored. So we've got Archie Thompson, Steve Halliday, who was part of undercover operations over the years involving the Hells Angels and likely Wortman as an informant, and a bunch of other people were part of a tight-knit circle who controlled the ball throughout the night and in the next day. And other officers, like the true heroes, like Chris Grund and Bill Neal and Nick Dorrington, who tried to be a hero, um, Darren Bernard, Sergeant Darren Bernard, were on the outside.
Yeah.
So some knew the inside story, most didn't.
Well, those those others, the heroic ones, were pushing back against these kinds of things and being resisted. Like the leaders wouldn't let them go into the scene, told them to stay back. So that's very suspicious. Double O Archie. We
And he,
talked last week or the week before about the conspiracies and how many people it takes to keep
yeah,
a story secret, and we're well under that number for this. And so, in a way, it's not surprising that they could have kept some of these things under wraps, even from people that were close to the situation.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that come out this week is that, I talked early on in my one of my first articles, back I think in the Halifax Examiner, I talked about a corporal throwing their gun in the woods and found in the woods. Well, I got confirmation from an insider this week saying the corporal threw their gun into the woods because they were afraid Wortman would wrestle the gun off them and kill them. And they were found sobbing in the woods. And I don't know if this is before Wortman left or after Wortman left or whatever happened. But again, this is another indictment of the RCMP system. And all these members were treated with kid gloves, never thoroughly interviewed, and none of this was ever addressed by the MCC. Geez, when I call a cop, I want them to come and be brave. I don't want them throwing, and putting their lives on the line. That's why they get paid the money. That's why they get golden pensions. I want them to be brave. And if you're going to wimp out and then go on sick leave and get a double pension because you're sick for the rest of your life because you were a chicken, uh, that's not a cop to me.
No, that's such a terrible thing to do. You can imagine, and it's there's a killer on the loose, and you have a gun, and you throw away the gun. Oh, yeah, what a strange thing to do.
Well, there you are. So Mr. Carney, as I said, we're not going away. There's lots of us now. And you want to cut off my head and say bad things about me? Well, there's Adam, and there's all kinds of people, ex-police officers, documentary makers who know this story. And the beauty of the story from a documentary point of view now is Anatomy of a Cover-Up isn't the end of the story. It's the second leg. The next leg, where is narrowed down now, we can see obviously what happened, and we're moving forward on all fronts. And we want our army to grow. We need true blue type people to come forward with documents, video, whatever they have, and we'll publish it and protect you while doing that. Ask True Blue.
Yeah. If you can find out who he is, but you can't because his or her name has never been revealed. No, we're good that way. Yeah, we've got a few minutes left, Paul, and while we've got the Prime Minister's attention, I thought, and we had talked about last week wanting to get into the Heidi Stevenson aspect of this. We can maybe introduce it now and get into it more next week. Because, and I was just reading this section again. You mentioned Darren Bernard, who stayed with Heidi Stevenson and stayed with her body, and that was an important cultural thing for him to do. That was sort of the aftermath of it all. But it was an example, I guess, of the Mass Casualty Commission in that case taking the evidence they wanted to hear from an unreliable, in a sense, witness. Not she was lying, that she was at a great distance and probably heard echoes of shots and so an inaccurate number of shots described rather than the limited number that the closer by witnesses, some of whom really weren't interviewed, heard at the Shubenacadie roundabout there, where Heidi Stevenson was killed, was executed, really. And there's a lot to get into with that. Do you want to give the Reader's Digest version here for a few minutes, and then we'll get into
Well,
it
I don't want to
next week?
say, there's a lot to unpack in the Heidi Stevenson thing, but what I'd like to address is I've seen a few comments from people. I've talked about this, how they staged and came up with an alternative narrative about Heidi Stevenson, where she's the hero and fires 14 shots. I show that didn't happen. Their own evidence shows it didn't happen. And I've had like Mountie apologists and others come forward and say, I've seen comments here and there, especially after the full comment podcast I did with the National Post with Brian Lilly, um, where they're saying, "Oh, just leave it alone. She's dead now. Just leave her to rest." And the point is, Heidi Stevenson shouldn't be dead.
Yeah.
And I said that from day one. Why was she there? And the point about Heidi Stevenson is she shouldn't have been there for any number of reasons. And the best thing about to learn from her death is that no one else but be put into that situation. No other Mountie again be put into that situation, under-equipped as she was, under-informed and under-supported.
Yeah, she was all by herself, basically. Chad Morrison
Yeah.
had just been shot, so he had to leave, and there was nobody else there with her.
And she was under-trained, either on purpose or because of her lack of skill. We don't know. None of that was examined because the RCMP desperately needed a hero. And I think that if there's to be meaning in Heidi Stevenson's life, it's that she was a victim of this, a victim of her own police force, as much as she was of Gabriel Wortman. And I'm not here to impugn her life or whatever, but I think there should be meaning in her life. And we should learn from it because the RCMP doesn't learn from things like this. A member like her dies, they hold a parade, sweep it under the rug and move on. Next. That's basically their attitude.
That's right, Paul. I mean, you declare somebody a saint, and all of a sudden you can't. There's no questions asked after that, right? And instead, Heidi Stevenson can be honored for many reasons. She was a good officer. She, liaison with the public, which is a skill not everybody has. There's many good things a person can say about Heidi Stevenson, but she got put into this situation for which she was under-equipped, under-prepared, and under-supported, and she was killed. And yeah, it's not her fault, but to just push that all aside is definitely in the interests of the RCMP to do. And so it seems suspicious because of that, because they have that clear motivation and interest in honoring her in this way and all this stuff. So, because it shuts down questions about her.
Yeah, and I think next week we'll definitely get into the Heidi Stevenson, unpack it, and show you all the things that happen, which are very, very disturbing. Because, Mr. Carney, if you have an ethical police leadership and an ethical force, none of this should have happened. What happened in the Heidi Stevenson case, what they did, what the Mass Casualty Commission and the Serious Incident Response Team did, it's well, the Serious Incident Response Team actually did the right thing in this case, but the
Yeah.
Department of Justice and the other government agencies worked with the RCMP to create a false narrative. And when you look at this, it makes you wonder when else did the RCMP do this? What other cases have they fabricated information? It's a damning indictment of the force and its practices.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it makes you look at their other actions in a different way when you know that they've misled and exaggerated in this case. And the Corey Ellison stuff, I mean, that still has to be resolved too. So lots more to discuss on the book tour. You're gonna be on TV today, Paul. This is we're recording this on Sunday the 22nd. You're gonna be on television later. Any other plans for the week?
I'm still busy dealing with film and documentary companies for the next couple of days. Just trying to weigh the best option on how to tell the story. Mr. Carney, when I looked at this after 22 murders in 2022 came out, I resisted dealing with documentary companies because I pointed out to them the story is not finished. And they had problems because the families of many of the victims would not cooperate with them. Now, and I told them, I said, the families are incidental to the larger story here. The story is about the institution and the failures of the RCMP and the unfortunate victims. I was here for the victims, the dead people, and for looking at the public policy issues. Now, with Anatomy of a Cover-Up, they can see the whole story and the fact that it's still got legs and we're closing in on the finale, which is going to come out. Make no doubt about it, it's going to come out. That makes for a very attractive sort of story to tell. And hopefully, all the naysayers and who like to pick on you and me, Adam, and all of us for picking away at this story will suddenly see, yeah, we're actually trying to do something unusual here to tell the real story and hold institutions accountable. Geez, who would think of that in this day and age?
Imagine, right? No, we're just sort of like picking at the corner of the little plastic wrap, and as soon as we got a good hold, we're gonna just rip it off, right? So
Yeah, it's
keep an eye.
coming. We got the names, we've got the situations. All we're doing now is filling in the blanks, building up the documents, and that part of the story is going to come out. So, Mr. Carney, get ahead of it.
Well, now that we've got the Prime Minister watching, we got to make sure we keep up on all this stuff. So, everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with more. So, we'll see you then.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, one last thing.
Yeah.
Isn't it sad? A comment about Canadian journalism. We can talk like this, tell people what we're going to do, and you can be guaranteed no one's going to pick up on it.
Well, our viewer numbers are good, so hopefully somebody's paying attention and they pass it around. But no, it is amazing, isn't it?
Yep.
All
See you
right,
later.
well,
Thank you.
see you
Have a good
next
week.
week.